Women have long been philanthropists, but their voices were often not heard. It wasn't unusual for women to give under their husbands' names, or to direct attention away from themselves by giving anonymously. It was in the 1970s, when women were creating a movement for a more equitable future, that they began to recognize the power of feminist-based philanthropy. The Ms. Foundation for Women, founded in 1972 by Gloria Steinem, Patricia Carbine, Letty Cotton Pogrebin, and Marlo Thomas, leveraged Ms. Magazine's profits to deliver funding and other strategic resources to organizations that elevated women's and girls' voices. After a few years, the foundation peeled off from the magazine to become its own nonprofit. It roared into the 1980s with a mission to encourage women's financial independence and protect their reproductive rights. In the 1990s, the Ms. Foundation highlighted women's career aspirations with its Take Our Daughters to Work Day. The foundation continued to champion causes into the new millennium: sex education, women's health, economic justice, child sex abuse. The Ms. Foundation was at the forefront, blazing the trail for so many of us. Today, the Ms. Foundation for Women focuses on the need for more philanthropic giving to organizations supporting women and girls of color. Teresa Younger, our keynote speaker, began this movement in 2014 when she became president and CEO of the foundation. While the foundation did groundbreaking work of its own, it also served as a role model for women's funds, organizations, and nonprofits doing work in their own communities. Throughout the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, groups sprang up all over the country that, like the Vermont Women's Fund, dedicated themselves to helping women and girls rise and thrive. These organizations, now numbering around 700, move money 6 times faster than other philanthropic groups. Today, the Vermont Women's Fund makes its grants in 3 general categories: systems change, workforce development, and essential services. The Vermont Women's Fund is following the lead of the Ms. Foundation and its work on racial equity grant-making, learning from its many years of experience. One such program is Susu Community Farm, the first and only Afro-Indigenous farm, healing, and education center in Windham County.
We offer programs, opportunities, ritual, and ceremony to connect people back with the land, to their relationship with ancestral practice, and to the skills and tools needed to heal from the trauma of colonization and racialized trauma. One of the programs we launched last year during the pandemic was our BIPOC CSA, which is a free CSA program for BIPOC folks in Windham County that offers culturally relevant Afro-Indigenous heritage crops that we grow here in Vermont.
Our workforce development programs often seek to empower women to work in better-paying jobs traditionally occupied primarily by men, but they also help to provide Vermont with workers our economy desperately needs to continue working for all of us. Programs like Let's Grow Kids, which supports early childhood education providers.
Early childhood education is so essential, especially in these times when people are really coming out of that pandemic and trying to get back into the workforce. We're facing a lot of challenges when it comes to childcare right now. There's a lot of programs that are having to close because they're not able to sort of support those staffing needs. Vermont Women's Fund has helped work with Let's Grow Kids, and that's been a really pivotal part for us changing the way that people in society and in our local communities are looking at early childhood education.
Our third category for giving is support for essential services. Grantees in this category provide the most vulnerable Vermont women with food, shelter, and other services to stabilize their lives. One such organization is Umbrella, which works to keep Vermonters in the Northeast Kingdom free from abuse and oppression. Its Youth Empower program prepares teens for the workplace.
Why did you want to participate in YIP specifically?
I think with YIP, they give you the platform to make a difference wherever you want. They gave me the foundational skills where I can stand up for myself more and stand up for others as well. I knew that I could interact with adults rather than being dictated by them. So I feel like I'm a larger voice now.
With all our grants, we work toward the vision advanced by the Ms. Foundation, using our collective contributions, no matter how small, to create a force for change.
Good evening and welcome to the annual Vermont Women's Fund fundraiser, annual benefit, and get together. I think you may or may not be able to see me. I'm Jane Lindholm. I work for Vermont Public Radio and Vermont PBS, and I am the executive producer and host of our National Kids podcast, But Why? A podcast for curious kids. And I'm so thrilled to be back here again this evening on what is one of my favorite evenings each year, doing this, participating in the Women's Fund work and in the annual fundraiser. This is now my third event for the Women's Fund, where the getting together portion of the evening has been virtual because of the pandemic. A year ago, we met over Zoom to talk with former USA soccer goalkeeper Brianna Scurry to look at the fight for equal pay in sports, a movement, as you well know, elevated by the Burlington girls soccer team, which made a national splash with its protests and its shirts. We also discussed what the pandemic was doing to women in the workforce. And I mentioned, and this is just about exactly a year ago now, that the warnings then were dire. In the first 6 months of the pandemic, the number of Hispanic women in the US labor force had dropped nearly 7%. The number of Black women declined 5.6%, and white women dropped almost 3%, compared to a drop of just 1% for white men and less than 1% for Hispanic men. The drop for Black men was more than 4%. Harvard Business Review estimated at the time that without any action taken, global GDP growth could be $1 trillion lower by 2030 than it would be if women's unemployment just tracked that of men. The Women's Fund had another virtual gathering 5 months ago this year, and we met several inspiring Southern Vermont entrepreneurs. And things were looking better in terms of the pandemic, but not for everyone. A CBS poll at the time found a quarter of US women said that their financial situation was worse than the spring of a year previous. That's compared with 18% of men. And a Wall Street Journal article showed that as of March, nearly 1.5 million fewer moms of school-aged children were actively working than before the pandemic. And mothers of color had a lower rate of return than white mothers. Well, where are we now? In September, 300,000 women left the workforce. That's the largest drop-off of women from the workforce since September of 2020. What happens in September? Well, children go back to school. Or do they? A totally scientific survey of the colleagues I work with who are also parents of young children and who I commiserated with today showed that 3 out of the 4 of us have at least one child at home right now because either the child has a cold, the child care center is closed because of COVID exposure, or the child has been named a close contact of another child who has COVID. So even with schools theoretically open, many families are still juggling childcare and health concerns. And that juggle typically falls to women. The total US workforce has about 2 million fewer women in it today than it did before the pandemic. I mention all of this in the context of this evening because when we talk about targeted philanthropic giving to the areas that need it most, targeting women, especially women of color, seems like a good start. But as you'll hear tonight, both Meg Smith, director of the Vermont Women's Fund, and Teresa Younger, president and CEO of the Ms. Foundation for Women, say that giving to causes that directly impact women and girls are a net gain for everyone. I'll be sitting down with Teresa Younger. Actually, you see her right here next to me now, but she can't talk yet. Not yet, Teresa. But we will be speaking in a few moments, and we're going to talk about all of this stuff, and we're going to take your questions. So start thinking now about what you would like to ask Teresa Younger. You can post your questions now in the chat function of your Zoom, or you can wait until after we started talking and think about what you'd like to add to the conversation then. If you have other questions, you're also welcome to post them in the chat. Somebody will be monitoring that and can get back to you. But first, to talk a little bit more about what the Vermont Women's Fund does and what it's doing right now is its director, Meg Smith. Meg, welcome.
Thank you, Jane. Gosh, those were some pretty sobering figures you just gave us. I want to welcome everyone to the Vermont Women's Fund annual celebration. It's great to all be together in one way or the other. I hope you enjoyed the pre-event sessions. It was, given the virtual format, we just wanted to find a way for us to connect and maybe learn something new about Proposition 5, for example, or discover some techniques on how to de-stress a little bit better. The whole point is to have fun and to connect with one another. And being together tonight is what it's all really about. And feeling the awesome energy of working together towards a common goal. That's what we're doing. And it's just what we call philanthropower. I want to, we know how tough the pandemic has been on women, and it's time for us to build our collective strength and accelerate philanthropower for the good of women and girls in Vermont and all of our communities. While philanthropower is about an individual grassroots movement, building donation by donation, the Women's Fund is also very lucky to have tremendous support from the private sector. These are firms and businesses that believe in our mission and do so with intention. A great example is the law firm of Gravel and Shea, our major sponsor and longtime partner. This Burlington-based law firm chose to show their unwavering commitment to gender equity by supporting our organization beginning many years ago. I mean, decades ago. And they continue to do so today at the highest level. Next on the sponsorship roster is VGS, an integrated energy services company that believes in a diverse workforce and supports our commitment to advance opportunities for women and girls. And driving change for women is in the DNA of dealer.com. In a male-dominated industry, this digital marketing automotive company works to change that paradigm, both internally and externally. We also want to thank the companies who partnered with us from the beginning of the year. They include Community National Bank, Lawson's Finest Liquids, OnLogic, Paul Frank and Collins, People's United Bank, PC Construction, Seventh Generation, the Vermont Community Foundation, and VSECU. And a special thank you to our new event sponsors, Berkshire Bank Wealth Management and RNL Associates, as well as Upper Valley Honda in White River Junction. There are also some other businesses to thank that have supported us with events early in the year, and you can see them on the screen. Okay, now I want to show you how Philanthropower is going to work tonight. We have a challenge match of $25,000 given by some wonderful donors who believe in our work. And we want to raise that amount of money and exceed it in 1 hour's time. You think we can do it? I do, because we've done it before. We're going to do it again. The need is greater than ever. So how do we do it? Well, it's with Philanthropower and a mobile phone. It's so easy. You can text in your contribution by typing 44321. And in the message field, type driving change, all caps, no spaces. From there, you press on that and that will take you to the fundraising page where you can make your contribution. It's super easy, it's super safe, and very effective. So please remember that the money we raise tonight to drive change is for the women and girls of Vermont. And we do it by funding nonprofits working in our communities across the state that have programs for women and girls. And these are all our wonderful grantee partners. This year, the Women's Fund gave to 29 organizations. That's the most ever. Too numerous to mention, you can see them on the screen. They deserve the applause for doing the work on the ground in the most difficult circumstances in our lifetime, helping to provide essential services and new opportunities in the workforce. We also want to thank the Vermont Women's Fund Council for their leadership. They, along with our grantees, are driving equity for all of us. And that's what the Women's Fund is all about. And that's why we asked Teresa Younger to be here with us tonight to learn from the mother of all women's funds. Jane, Teresa, please take it away.
Thank you, Meg. Appreciate that. Everything that you have just laid out, Meg, really helps guide us into the next part of this evening. And I'm particularly interested in how philanthropic organizations like the Vermont Women's Fund, which target giving to local organizations, work in tandem with national philanthropic organizations like the Ms. Foundation to kind of cover everybody, or one would hope cover everybody who needs this kind of funding to meet their powerful missions. Just last week, the Ms. Foundation for Women announced $4 million in grants that will go to more than 100 organizations working for social justice. But very purposefully and transparently, the organization targeted those funds to other organizations led by women and girls of color. More than 90% of that funding will go to organizations led by BIPOC women. This remarkable targeted giving is supported by a report the foundation put out a year ago called Pocket Change: How Women and Girls of Color Do More with Less. They released this report as a call to action, noting that, quote, total philanthropic giving to women and girls of color as of 2018 accounts for about 0.5% of the total $66.9 billion given by foundations. So this recent announcement of $4 million in grant funding targeted to women and girls of color is putting the Ms. Foundation's money where its mouthpiece is. Tonight, we're going to get to talk with the Foundation's president and CEO, Teresa Younger. She's been leading the organization since 2014. She previously worked in executive positions for Connecticut's Permanent Commission on the Status of Women and as executive director of the ACLU of Connecticut. Teresa Younger, what a pleasure to welcome you to Vermont. Thank you so much for being here this evening.
It's wonderful to be here, especially this time of the year.
Yes, you came at the right time, although it is past peak. Sadly, you missed the very best of it.
It's been gorgeous. The drive up was fantastic.
And those of you joining us tonight, I want to let you know there will be time a little while later for you to ask Teresa questions. And so if you want to post those in the chat function of your Zoom right now, you can, or we're going to come back we're going to talk for 15 minutes and then Meg will talk for a little bit more. And then we'll have this Q&A that you get to have with Teresa. And I will try to moderate as best I can. So go ahead and throw those in the chat now if you'd like. And as we have this conversation, Teresa, I just want to preface it by saying when we talk about gender, when we talk about women, you are using a very expansive definition of women.
Yeah, I think we have to just come to terms with the fact that where we were when we started the Ms. Foundation for Women in 1973, which was about consciousness raising and recognizing our own personal power and building on that power, was very different than where we are today. Today, we are about an expansive conversation about equity and equality. And we use gender as a mechanism to get there, but I don't actually like to use that word, particularly at the Ms. Foundation, because we are sitting at the intersection of race and gender. Both are misnomers. There are not two genders. There are not five races, right? These are all defined, not by us. And so I oftentimes say that we are talking about the most expansive conversation we can have around gender nonconforming, transgendered folks. We are talking about an expansion towards equity and equality, which means we're using the term women as a way to get there so that everybody has that, including men.
So let's talk about this $4 million that you announced recently. You were quoted as saying in response to that announcement, if we're going to drop a pebble in the pool of inequality, we will drop that pebble for women and girls of color so that anybody in the pool will receive the ripple effect. And hopefully we will make change for them too. And you were just talking about an expansive idea of gender, that when you find equity and equality for women, you are helping to find equity and equality for all. It's kind of turning the trickle-down theory on its head. So how does dropping that pebble for equality in the pool of women and girls of color have that ripple effect out to getting everybody where they need to be?
Well, it's not a competition to the bottom. And I think sometimes we go into like, this person is doing worse than that person and that's not what we're about. You know, what we recognize, because statistics tell us, we have real data from individual. You even talked at your office, right? The reality is when we look at the pool of inequality, there are a whole bunch of folks in that pool and they are sitting at different places. We have a limited amount of resources at the Ms. Foundation. And so we have to figure out where we think we can have the greatest impact. So about 5 years ago, we decided to start our strategic planning process. And in that process, we really came to terms with the fact that women and girls of color needed to be included in the conversation because we had not been. So by saying that, it's not excluding anybody else. It is about recentering the conversation around them. And so, people were like, well, what does this mean for white women? What does this mean for white girls? What does this mean for the LGBTQ? If you are not explicit, I said, we have one pebble to drop. So where are we going to drop it? And in that pool, we hope that all of those ripples will change everybody's lives. And what we also know is that we all have multiple identities. And so we are sitting in multiple places. And so, that's really when I use that, it's because people go, but what about? And I'm like, oh, that pool is big. It is big. And we want to drop the biggest pebble we can. So by moving $4 million last year, we were able to drop a bigger pebble than we have been able to drop in many, many years.
What is that money going to do?
We trust that women have the answers to help and heal their communities. And so we give general operating support to organizations. We had 5 different strategies that we were introducing, and we are looking at multi-year grant making. And so, in that format, it is about building collective power. It is about supporting movement structure, and it is about amplifying voices. And that is what we are attempting to do when we make our grants. In some cases, we went out and found grantees. In some cases, those grantees came recommended to us. In some cases, we had pre-existing relationships. And so, we looked at a whole bunch of ways to make that happen so that we could support what was happening in the best way we could. I mean, when you quoted information from the Pocket Change report. Pocket Change, the bottom line on Pocket Change is overall $5.48 are being allocated to women and girls of color. What we need to put into perspective
Per person?
Per girl, per woman and girl of color, $5. Everybody gets a cup of coffee. Right. That's what you get, right? But one of the things we really wanted to lift up also was that, of the billions of dollars that philanthropy is moving, 1.2% of all of those dollars are going to women and girls. And so, you take 0.5% of all of those, like you're really not talking about very much. And we broke that report out by state. So state by state, you can see, and region by region, you can see where those dollars are being allocated. And we have to do a better job of supporting all women and girls. And we have to do a much better job of supporting women and girls of color.
One of the other things that report found was that it's not just giving more money, but in fact, it's sometimes connecting grantees with organizations that can give them money, that want to give them money, that want to support this kind of work. But that connection isn't happening. Either the philanthropic organizations aren't explicitly saying, hey, we want to give you money. We are working specifically with women and children of color. Or the grantees don't know where to look. They've never done this. They don't know how to write a grant proposal. So how do you work at both ends of that equation to bring those groups together?
What we say is we want to support what is going on. So we're in partnership with other women's funds, just like the Vermont Women's Fund. We are in partnership with who they might be funding. We are looking to grow and sustain different organizations. So what we have said in the report itself was name it. If you are funding women and girls of color, name it. Say that's what you're doing. Say it out loud so that those organizations, oftentimes small organizations with less than $500,000, don't have to go digging around for it. We all have limited amount of time. So be explicit about what you're doing. Track it. Tell us what you're doing. Have you seen changes? What does that look like? It's not just little changes. It's like, what does the long-term change look like? And then increase it. Make a commitment to increase it. And I know we're going to have a conversation later about endowments that will help foundations and other organizations be able to plan ahead as opposed to planning year to year. And so what we've said to philanthropy more broadly is name it, track it, increase it, and be explicit about what you are attempting to do.
We saw this video earlier, right at the beginning of tonight, that was pretty fabulous. And one of the things it addressed was that historically, women have either not been able to or not felt comfortable to give under their own names, or to give money and to direct that money, or to be forceful about their money and where they want it to go when they have it. So how do you work on some of the ingrained gender issues just in wealth and philanthropy as you work with women who may be saying, I have money and I want to direct it, but I don't know how to do it?
Yeah. Well, first off, I oftentimes say we cannot apologize for money. And I think as women, we are ingrained to, if we make too much money, we apologize. If we make too little money, we apologize. When we give our money, we apologize. We are the great apologizers. So what I say all the time is stop apologizing. Guess what? We are not seeing men apologize for any aspect of it. And so, and the systems of capitalism were not designed for or by women. Period. So we actually just have to stop with that. We're in 2021. We are in the middle, hopefully maybe towards the end of a pandemic. We are seeing generational changes in the workplace. So what I say all the time is, don't apologize for it. Don't apologize for any of it. If you're making money, give it away. Make sure you're taking care of yourself, be able to retire, but also be intentional about where you're giving those dollars. And that's where relationships and partnerships are really important. If you have $1 to give away $1. You do not have to be giving away millions of dollars to think that you're doing the most important work. In fact, what we know in our grant making at the Miss Foundation is that the grants that are $5,000 or even $1,000 are as impactful as the grants that are $50,000. And that's the top of our grant making. So, we understand that it is about that. And we say, this is not about going it alone, right? This is about collectively pooling our dollars and having an impact. And that's really what it's about. It's like being able to say, guess what? Here's what I have to give away. I have to take care of these responsibilities, but here's what I have to give away. It's not all that I might want to, but it is what it is. And so I say all the time, let's talk about money. And let's really come to terms with what our own barriers are to having those conversations. It's often like, if the waitress was making $150,000 a year, doesn't the waitress work hard? Shouldn't everybody be having a livable wage? Well, then let's not get into whether you think she's getting paid too much or not, because in most cases, women are getting underpaid. And in the few cases where women are making comparable wage, let it be. Let them be the model that we can be striving for.
On the other end of the equation, how do you work on the power imbalance? Because, you do think about women and these organizations getting money. And often there is that sort of go between the philanthropic organization and the people the actual people who are benefiting from that money. And perhaps both the people who are giving the money and the people who are the ultimate recipients have this very strong connection to that middle organization. Nonetheless, there can be this feeling of strings attached, or this feeling of a power imbalance that somebody is gifting the money. I am the gifter and I am telling you what to do with this money. Yeah. And then at the other end, there can be this feeling of inequity. Even as you're trying to be sort of lifted up by this philanthropic giving, there's still this sense of, I needed the money, I am somehow less than, or I have to be beholden to the people who were generous enough to give me something that I deserved. Yeah. So how do you work on that?
So one, I'm not dealing with charity, I'm dealing with change. And what I want people to do is work towards change and understand that you will be uncomfortable giving up power, no matter who you are. As a supervisor in my workplace, when I give up power, I feel a little uncomfortable because I don't know what's going on, but I trust what's going on. And so if we actually as a society worked from a place of abundance instead of a place of scarcity, we get into a very different conversation. If we move from charity to change, we get to a very different conversation. And when we are talking about women's funds and women's funding communities, we are talking about change. Now, women's funds started as charity. Now we are talking about change. It is a positioning of power, and there is an imbalance of financial power in this country and in the world, but in this country and in every single state. So let's get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and let's get real about having the conversation about what change really looks like, and trusting, what I said earlier, trusting that women have the answers to help and heal their communities. They cannot be dictated to, because you are not living their lived experiences.
I have a ton more questions for you, but I want to make sure that we have time for those who are gathered tonight to ask questions and for the other things that we have to talk about. But before I let you go for this portion, okay, I want to know one thing that you learned as a Girl Scout that you still think about today, because almost every bio I read of you included the pride you have in being a Girl Scout.
I bleed green. I'm a Girl Scout in my heart. I think there are many lessons that I learned. I mean, I've given commencement speeches for like 6 hours on that. But I would say that the values that I learned in Girl Scouting about wanting to change the world and to be a sister to every Girl Scout means that you operate with generosity and trust, and that you try to do just one thing every day. And so for me, it really is, I want to change the world. I want to do good in the world. I want to make a difference in the world. And that is something that I've learned through Girl Scouting.
All right. We have more to talk about with that, and we will be back. And if you have questions again for Teresa, go ahead and post them in the chat now. But in the meantime, let's go back to Meg.
Thank you. Wow. I can't wait for this conversation to continue. Change, not charity. That is so true for what we are doing and what other women's funds are doing across the country. So let's see how we're doing on the thermometer. Yeah, $7,212. We're getting up there. Please don't forget that this is a great time to make your pledge. And we want you to do it now so that we can get that challenge match of $25,000. And one thing I want to mention that I learned from Teresa actually is that during the pandemic, women's funds moved money out 6 times faster than other philanthropic organizations. They really know how to target and move money quickly. And I believe our Women's Fund did the very same thing. But we can't do this without your support, and we can't do this without you being there, not just with your dollars, but talking about the Women's Fund, talking about some of the issues, challenging us to grow and be a stronger and a better organization. Meanwhile, we have something that we're teeing up now, a new initiative that we're very, very excited about. And it really starts with the fact that, did you know that no one knows how many women-owned business owners there are in Vermont? We discovered that fact when Change the Story did a report in 2017 on women's business ownership and its impact on the Vermont economy. Turns out there was no way to track all women-owned businesses in the state, and they had to use census data in order to make their findings, which were somewhat accurate, but not exact. What they found was there were over 23,000 women-owned businesses in the state, and they made contributed revenues of over $2.3 billion to our economy, which is all fantastic. But it turns out women-owned businesses, the revenues from their companies were considerably smaller than male-owned businesses. They didn't grow their businesses. They didn't hire employees. Often they undercharged or undervalued their services. And we don't really know why. We have ideas, but we want to find out more. And when I say they undercharged, I mean they really undercharged, because the dollars, it turned out that women-owned businesses made in total 19 cents to the dollar of a male-owned business. So that is a huge disparity, but it's also a tremendous opportunity for us, the Women's Fund, and for Vermont to grow this sector. But first, we have to count them, and then we want to listen. So that's what our project, This Way Up, is all about, putting power to our numbers. Studies have shown that 90% of a woman's income goes directly back into the community.
We're finally going to be able to put numbers to the economic contribution that women-owned businesses have been contributing to the state's economy.
And that's stuff that we can all see and experience together as the report lives and grows over time. You can see it populate and impact the numbers live.
To demonstrate the collective power that women have on Vermont's economy. And not only to demonstrate it, to help build it, to energize it.
This is the first time that someone's ever heard their voices and asked, what is it that you need? What is it that you need to grow your business? And then how can we help?
I think that it's going to tell a lot of cool stories, not just in terms of the economic impact that women statewide are having, but giving voice to this experience, right?
They need financing, they need education, they need mentorship, and that's part of what This Way Up is going to bring to the entire state. Excited about This Way Up, and you're going to be hearing more about it. We actually are going to launch it officially next week, so this was a little sneak preview. Please stay tuned for this information on this, and we are going to want all of you to help. So why don't we now go back to Teresa and Jane to hear more about women's funds, feminism, challenge, change, not charity.
Thank you, Meg. And all of you watching today, just a reminder that thermometer is continuing while we have this chat. So we're going to kick this off with some questions from those of you. Throw them in the chat window in Zoom if you're able to. And it's, weird technology here during COVID times. I'm going to get a text from Sarah Monroe on my phone. I'll be able to see your questions. We'll make it work. Yeah. But while we get them loaded up, Teresa, can you talk a little bit about how you came up in this world of philanthropy and policy and all of the activism that you've done over the years?
Wow.
Yeah, in 30 seconds or less. Right.
No, I had gone to college to work with children. I thought children were the way to change the world, and they really are the way to change the world. And I was running a program called Project Maury. I started it, and it's now in its 26th year. And it was about taking children living in inner city environments and taking out them to nature, to the thing we all love so much here in Vermont. And, in that process, I realized that it was policy that was influencing their lives more than the service I was able to provide for them. And so I left and went to the ACLU so that I could work on juvenile justice and reproductive rights. And then 9/11 happened. And so I wasn't working on either of those. And I went to the ACLU as a non-lawyer. I believe my life is about left-hand turns, making really tough turns in order to get things done. And that's what I was, anticipating and thinking I was going to do. And I worked at the ACLU of Connecticut for 3.5 years, met some really amazing people. And it reinforced what I knew from the Girl Scouts, was that women were like helping to control and make decisions in their lives, in their homes, in their communities. And I went to the National ACLU office and really worked with each state office and tried to be helpful. It was the first time I came to Vermont, was to work with the ACLU of Vermont at the time. It was really an amazing experience. And then the Permanent Commission on the Status of Women opened up, and I thought, how much better would it be to tie policy and women's quote unquote issues, and I'll explain issues in a minute, to what I was really interested in, cared about, and adding voice. Women's voices needed to be heard in state houses. And so I went to the commission, and I loved the work. I got to do some pass and work on some amazing laws. At the time, I was working with other women's commissions in the area. And as I was, in that role, I always say have an exit strategy. And it was a great job, and somebody else needed to do it because it was a great job. Get out of somebody's way so they can take on the job. And so the Ms. Foundation job opened up. And I had known I wanted to go into philanthropy. I had worked with the women's funding community in Connecticut to support the work and policy work we were doing at the commission. And so I was like really thinking about philanthropy. And I wanted an organization that was national, that was close and had relationships with the grantee partners, that was had a legacy and a history of the work it was doing, and that really centered conversations around feminism. And the Ms. Foundation hired me. It's like the ACLU. I always say, like, sometimes you just take a risk and base it on your gut that the person's the right person. The ACLU hired a camp director from North Dakota to run the ACLU of Connecticut. And, the Ms. Foundation hired a policy wonk in Connecticut to run its national foundation.
I wish I could be a fly on the wall in those interviews that you had for that job because I assume you said to them, listen, here's what I would do as the leader. I would be really intentional about targeted giving to women and girls of color and to see that change come about. I mean, that was an organization that had to buy into your vision and maybe was ready to, but I assume you were saying that.
It was interesting. That's a really great question, Jane, because they asked me what my vision was. And I said to them, I'm not even sure. I've worked with the women in Connecticut and I grew up in North Dakota, but I don't know what needs to happen across the country. And so I went on a listening tour, and how we got through our strategic plan and where I got to meet other really dynamic leaders was by sitting down and listening to the stories and hearing what they said, what their concerns were. And I came back to the foundation and said, we need to be intentional, far more intentional and explicit. We need to be okay ourselves with being uncomfortable about what we want to do and making other people uncomfortable, because it's the only way we're going to change the systems and the structures that need to be changed.
Yeah, I heard you on a podcast saying if you die, one of the legacies is that you were okay with being uncomfortable and making other people uncomfortable. And that's an okay legacy to have.
Because it's absolutely okay legacy. I also want on my tombstone to just say she tried.
Right.
She tried.
Maybe not always successful.
Yeah, well, and that's just it. We don't have to be successful. We just have to try. If we fail and can get comfortable with failing, we will try more as women.
We could do a whole other conversation about the power of failure. But in the meantime, Ellen has a question for you. So Ellen says, how can we encourage more women to be intentional about their giving and really think about the impact that their dollars can have in the lives of women and girls?
That's a great question. And one is to say that they don't have to have all the answers. I mean, we know this from hiring, research, et cetera, where women will apply for a job if they know 90% that they meet 90% of the qualifications. Men will apply for a job if they meet 50% of the qualifications, right? Or even 10% of the qualifications. And so women have a bar where it's like, well, if I don't know that organization, or I don't know what I can give, or I'm not giving enough, that they don't do it. And so we really need to be able to say, you don't have to have all of the answers. In fact, you don't have to research the organization. That's where women's funds are so critically important. They have done the due diligence with the organizations, and they have built a relationship with those organizations. And so you can give to a women's fund and be comfortable that the money is going somewhere, and it's going to be tracked, and they're going to connect things. They're going to make the dots happen. They're going to understand what's going on. And I think you also have to recognize that most organizations have written in their mission statements and in the work that they're trying to do, the thing you want to hear, and they are doing the thing their community needs. And so, it is okay to give money. It is okay to give money and not dictate where it's going. And it is okay to give money to things you care about. And you don't have to apologize for it, and you don't have to explain it. You can say, because it matters to me. And women are oftentimes noted for giving into the future generations. And so that's also really important. What affected you and what affected somebody else may be very different, or it may be the same. And you can determine, where that goes. I have a friend who is an amputee. And all of her dollars are going to Shriners because Shriners helped her when she was a little girl, right? But now that she's an adult woman, She's got some dollars that are going to Shriners, but she also is recognizing her role as a woman business owner and what kinds of legacy she wants to support in that. So she's also figuring out what that looks like. And if we operate from a place of abundance and not scarcity, we can recognize that we can make pivots in our lives and determine what that needs to look like. And, when was the last time you had a conversation with your girlfriends about where you might want to put your money or how you might want to save your money? Have those conversations. If we can't have them with our friends, then we can't have them with our families. Then we can't be out proselytizing about it publicly.
That's a conversation I've just started having with my mom, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
I think when the older generation gets to the point where they're trying to figure out what does happen to my money, but then if they bring that to my generation, then it allows me to start thinking too about, oh, right, I should also be thinking about, if I ever have any money, where would it go?
We just said that, right? We're never going to retire because we're both in these, the nonprofit setting. But I do think it's really important. We have to, this idea that we have to just get comfortable talking about our money. What we do and don't have cannot be compared to somebody else's. It has to be compared to ourselves.
Lots of people in the chat finding something in that message of being uncomfortable, being okay, being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I, for a minute, thought that you were saying that women don't need to research the organizations that they're applying to a job for. You were saying don't research if you're giving to a women's fund. And I was like, whoa, I've just been given permission not to have to research any of the companies I apply to a job with.
If you're applying for a job, research the company because the policies need to align with your values.
Right. We also have another question and comment saying, yes, Teresa, this economy was not designed by us or for us. What if we could create an economy that centered women? And actually, thank you for that comment, because this brings us into something I just read from you just today, and I wanted to ask you about this. It dovetails nicely with that. Okay. You penned an op-ed with Joy Anderson, the president and founder of the Criterion Institute, and in it, you together said, quote, "These are unprecedented times, yet remarkably, the same metrics that were being used before, stock market performance as an example, are measuring our recovery. We need to ask different questions in this financial context and imagine that we could change it." So what metrics should we use to change things? What should we be looking at as we hopefully redesign this post-pandemic world?
So I think part of the metrics come in with the other conversations, right? So what is happening with childcare? Are people staying in workplace longer? Do they have access to healthcare? What is the debt that they are carrying in healthcare? What is the debt that they are carrying from college education? What might that look like if we reconstituted some of the measurements? Right now, if you looked at the stock market, you would think that there was no pandemic going on. Our endowment's doing pretty well. My retirement's doing pretty well. But at the end of the day, my sister, my friends, women that I don't know, people that I don't know, folks I don't know, are also still unemployed, underemployed, or choosing not to go back into the workforce. So, part of it goes back to what I said earlier, which is we have to be willing to try system challenges that will fail.
But who gets to do that if the women and people of color are not empowered to force that change now?
Power is determined not just by where you sit, but by what you do. So we are seeing a lot of power by those who are marching in the streets, those who are going to the polls, those who are determining now to run for political office, and not just big political office, but you want power, make a determination about whether you're going to run for school board or your town finance board, or what you're going to do. That is where it all begins. Have a conversation about what that needs to look like. Will you be, what do you believe are the values of your community that need to be carried out? So when we talk about what the standard measurements are, and Joy and I are in these conversations a lot, we, oftentimes are sticking, stickums all over the wall as we're in conversation. What are the values? Is housing a value? Should everybody have a place to sleep that's not a homeless shelter? Is healing trauma of value? Then what kinds of supports are we putting in place? Is a food Is food of value, that we want to make sure that everybody eats healthy, right? Is education of value? Then how are we providing those supports? Is childcare of value? If we actually reconstructed those things that we place as values, and not the stock market and how much money is being generated, but what does our social capital really look like?
And that goes for men too.
Goes for everybody.
So men are included in this.
This goes for everybody, regardless of how you define, because I say this all the time, right? If we really want to get towards equity and equality, every pair of pants would have pockets. And guess what? My pants don't have pockets. And in fact, most women's clothing do not have pockets. And so if we want to get to equality and equity, put pockets in everything, or take pockets out of everything. Right?
Don't do that.
I know. I love pockets. So what if we put pockets in everything, right? So like, that's how you have to just rethink all of this. Everything. What if every flooring was actually the same, and recognizing that it can't be? Our lived experiences are all so very different.
Lots of comments coming in, lots of people who really want to just applaud this idea of discomfort, who want to talk about how women's funds, the Vermont Women's Fund, the Ms. Foundation, are about systemic change. And that is what this kind of foundational giving can do. Mm-hmm. And another comment saying, I'm not dealing with charity, I'm dealing with change.
Yes.
So Teresa, you just mentioned endowments. So this is a good moment actually for me to just slip away and bring Meg Smith back in, because the two of you can have a really interesting conversations about endowments. I'll be right back.
Absolutely.
Jane. Hey, Teresa.
Hey, Meg.
It's so great to have you here. Thank you. This is such a fantastic conversation. I'm really here to just first announce that in January of 2020, the Women's Fund decided to double its endowment. We had our endowment had been basically stalled at kind of the same amount for several years. And we decided it was time to double our impact and double our strength. And we decided to take on a $3 million endowment campaign, which for us was really huge. Mm-hmm. And that was January of 2020. So you can imagine when March hit, we were a little panicked, and we stopped and thought, okay, what do we do? But we had assembled an amazing team of a campaign committee co-chaired by Mary Powell and Wynn Smith, two wonderful, notable leaders in our state. And along with that, Dana Donaldson, Lauren Ann Geiger, Alex McLean, and Shauna Trombley all helped to basically create the campaign, which we relaunched in about July of 2020. And it's called When Women Thrive. And we have already, I'm so happy to say that tonight we are able to announce for the first time that we are almost 75% of our goal. And we're about the $2.2 million mark. And we're going to begin the public phase of the campaign beginning early next year, which I'm super excited about and really happy to tell everyone here tonight about. But I have to note, what made this accomplishment possible was a lead gift of $500,000 that came from the Miller family in honor of Holly Miller. Holly embraced the idea of the Women's Fund from its very start. She understood the importance of women being philanthropists, and she understood what it was like to need help herself as a young woman. She had lived experience that we've all learned from. She's spoken about it a lot, and her generosity and that of her family is legendary around here. So this incredible donation came in along with many, many others. And the Holly Miller campaign is part of our general When Women Thrive campaign. And we're so humbled and grateful. And I'd just love to talk to you a little bit more about endowments and how the Ms. Foundation has looked at its endowment. There's a lot of controversy about endowments. Some people believe in just spending them down, or we should be distributing wealth. Curious to hear your thoughts.
So, nobody asks the Met if there should be an endowment. Nobody asks Harvard if there should be an endowment. We have these conversations about endowments and what they should be or not be when we're talking about oftentimes women, people of color, indigenous communities. We have this we can't, what will they do with the money, right? Let's look at endowments for what they are. And I'm not talking about large, huge institutions that have more money than they know what to do with. What you are trying to do, and what the Ms. Foundation does, is try to stabilize our dollars. What people sometimes forget is that endowments with organizations like public foundations like yours and mine, we are raising our dollars every single year. We are asking folks every single year to come up with $25,000 so we can meet the match of $25,000 so we have $50,000 to move to the field and pay for your staff, right? But endowments actually allow us to plan into the future. You get an endowment, you have the dollar amount, you know what you're going to draw down. Public foundations are required to draw down 5% minimally. Most public foundations are drawing down much more than that. At the Ms. Foundation, we're required to draw down 5%, but we draw down 7% to move more money. And so endowments are really good about allowing us to plan into the future, to help the organizations that we are funding plan into the future. It allows us to make multi-year gifts. It allows us to provide consistency for our staff. It allows us to think generationally. We are not going to get rid of systemic sexism, racism, xenophobia, homophobia, transphobia, all of the things in a day. And we're not going to get rid of them by the Ms. Foundation or the Vermont Women's Foundation. We are only going to get rid of them if we invest in the long haul for what that's going to look like. So we need to get your endowment to $3 million, but what we need to do is get the endowment to $6 or $10 million.
Right on.
Because then your drawdown allows you to move more money to the field, allows you to ensure that you are paying your staff effectively, allows for a nonprofit to know the dollars are coming in and to be able to set up retirement accounts for their staff, pay for healthcare for their staff, because they're also raising every dollar that they need to make in order to do the work. I find that endowments say, we believe that the future needs to be established. So I say all the time, if you have a child, a daughter or a son, or somebody who hasn't defined yet, if you have a grandchild, you should be planning on making an endowment gift to the thing that matters most to you. And I believe that women's funds are working towards the greatest amount of gender equity in the world. And so you should make that gift to a women's fund, because that is about generational change. It is about having the dollars for the organizations that your children and grandchildren may care about one day. And we, at the Ms. Foundation, we have an endowment, and I want that endowment tripled, because that would still make us one of the smallest endowments ever.
I hear you. Well, that's absolutely. I'll be calling you early next year as we launch this. I do want to take a look at the thermometer and see how we're doing, because we've got a big goal and it's moving up.
Yes.
But we're not halfway there.
We got to get more.
Yeah, we really have to, and we don't have a lot more time. So I'm hoping people can really think about what you've heard from Teresa and Jane in this conversation and the importance of women's funds and what we're just trying to do this year. In 2021 alone, we gave $331,000 out in grant money to 29 nonprofits across the state. And I'm really proud of that fact. But we should be giving more. And given the economy and given where we are, again, with the stock market, that people of wealth have increased their net worth as high as 40%, there's really no excuse not to be giving money now at this time, at this critical time.
I just want to challenge people to think about the endowment. But if you've got 10 friends, if you've got 10 girlfriends, ask 10 girlfriends to give $100 a piece and give that money, pledge it today, put it up there, make sure you're, doing the text to pledge, and then talk to them about what that needs to look like. How are you as a community going to ensure that you're all doing something? And maybe somebody gives $10 because they're unemployed today, and somebody else gives $150. Do it as a way to open a conversation that you might not have had. And what might that look like? we at the Ms. Foundation, we had our board chair, her children were watching one of our fundraising events on TV, and they said, okay, I'm going to make a commitment of my Christmas money. I'm going to match my Christmas gifts with what I'm able to, raise from. And she said, okay, then I will match that. Right.
Wow.
And so creating a giving culture in your household can start at whatever level and anywhere, and can begin with your friends. And so, be really creative, about what that looks like and how you can get there. And there's really no reason why the people of Vermont can't be helping us raise $25,000 today. You do not have to put down all $25,000. You can put down what you can put down.
Exactly.
It's collectively building power.
And just one thing I'd like to ask and add is that we have had tremendous support from male-identified people in our community, particularly in the last few years since the Me Too movement, where a lot of men realized that they did not want to be put in the same category as a Harvey Weinstein. And I have found that to be incredibly invigorating and exciting. And I noticed that the Ms. Foundation had started bringing men on its board as early as 2001. Do I have that right?
Yeah. We are committed to having 10% of our board be men. And so, because the conversation is about getting towards equity and equality.
Right.
And they see that just as much as we do. And not because they see it for their daughters or their mothers or their partners. They see that because they want to live in a world where they are seen as equal, where they are lifting up as they go forward also, and that they understand the privilege that they are given just by being born identified as a male in this society. And so, and we have really great conversations. What people have to understand is that when you work on behalf of the issues that affect the lives of women in their communities, you are not working against men. Right. And I think there was always this idea that we were working against something, not for something. And we are working for equity and equality. And that means everybody needs to come along.
Yeah, it's so, so true. That's made a big difference for us in our work, is having the support of men. All right, we're at 15,000, and I can't close this evening out without us meeting our goal, if at all possible. But I'm seeing some wonderful, wonderful donations from people. So let's keep looking at the screen for 1 minute. I'm going to bring Jane back just to chat with you for a second.
Thanks, Meg. And I have been actually getting some of the information about what people have been sending in the chat, which Teresa and I can't see. So Teresa, right. You're operating blind here. But it sounds like, Meg, lots of chatter about making gifts, sharing the campaign with others, sharing with friends, doing that work that Teresa is talking about sharing with your girlfriends, sharing with your family. And I'll just mention, Teresa, one of the show that I currently work on is a podcast for kids. And one of the most inspiring things that happens to us occasionally is when we get a $5 bill in the mail from a kid who says, I care about your program and I'm going to support it. And what the parents tell us is that they are creating this sense of giving in their household, and they have an allowance and they divide it up. So, 1/3 is to save, 1/3 is to spend, and 1/3 is to give. And it's not much. It's literally a $5 bill. And that accounts for money that they've saved for weeks. But it is this culture of giving that families are sort of curating, which is so inspiring.
Well, and when you're building it collectively, their $5 and the other child's $5 and the parent's $5, that's $15. And that goes a lot further. That money can be going towards, a farm program, that can be going towards a salary somewhere. It's really interesting that happens. And we have to talk to our kids about money. And we have to teach them how to give dollars away, right? I remember I used to hoard my dollars, right? And so I didn't want to give it away. And how you give it away matters too. You said you were having a conversation with your mom, right? What's the legacy she wants to leave? And I think that's really critically important about, what that needs to look like, what that could look like. If you can't do it today, everybody also needs to work on having a will. Everybody needs, where you put those things. I know it's really, you're like, oh, it's morbid. But if we live in a world of in a position of abundance, and we live our lives as fullest as we can every day, and we find great gratitude and appreciation, then when we pass on into wherever people decide they're going to go, then you get to say, if I have $5 to my name, this is of value to me, and this is where I want to spend it. And we're just trying to do the best we can, every one of us, every day. And so what does that look like?
Not morbid, just one more thing on my to-do list to make the will. I'm like, oh no, I keep being reminded.
And do my will.
and clean the house and go for a run and make dinner, right? So this is still going. Meg is still looking at the thermometer. It is going to stay open, so you can continue to make a gift. And also, we are encouraging you, Meg and the Vermont Women's Fund and the Vermont Community Foundation are encouraging you to share a Philanthro-Power selfie. So you can show your support for Vermont women and girls by tagging your selfies with Philanthro-Power, Women Driving Change, and tag in VT Women's Fund. And there will also be a chat room open, a group open for people who want to connect after this is over, because we know many of you still have lots of things to do with your evening. So we are going to conclude this event, but if you're still hoping to network, maybe next time we can actually do this gathering in person again. Won't that be lovely? But in the meantime, Teresa Younger, thank you so much for being with us tonight, for inspiring us in many different ways. One message I'm going to take away is not to apologize for my success. So thank you for everything that you have said and given to us tonight.
Thank you so much. It's been such an honor. I look forward to coming back, and it's been great to meet you, Jane.
Thank you. And thanks to all of you for joining tonight. Thanks to the Vermont Women's Fund, the Vermont Community Foundation, and everyone who worked to make tonight possible. There are so many people who did that. And thanks to all of you for showing your support in whatever way you can, just for showing up, and of course, for supporting. And the thermometer stays open as the team works to get to $25,000. Thank you and good night.